Playing Resident Evil 3 Remake for the first time really struck me. Not just the gameplay or the tight story, but the context of playing it during a real viral pandemic. The opening sequence that uses live-action footage to establish a tone was disarming for us. It doesn't show zombies or monsters. It shows people, rioting and destroying things. It shows panic. As a Resident Evil fan, we were excited to see this intro because it parallels Resident Evil 1's remake intro, which shows news reports before they show Bravo team going in to investigate the murders. It's something that helps make the scenario feel more real, more grounded. The real element in RE1 falls away rather quickly. After all, you get attacked by zombie dogs before you get control of your character. But it does help with the setup. In 3 Remake, the real element doesn't fall away for us until Nemesis is introduced. Up until that point, it was still holding a line. The dream sequence was distressing and intense. Jill's apartment communicated her depression and dysfunction, and the documents around the house built up this feeling of dread. And it wasn't so much the impending danger of monsters, but of the city failing its people and falling apart. Adding it all up, it felt really familiar to how we feel right now. As a leftist, to be honest, we love the intro to Resident Evil 3. Probably because of how it seemed to lay out the world in a way that's very consistent with what we've been seeing. And it spoke without being heavy-handed. When we play games and we feel validated in our worldview, it sometimes worries us, because discourse about games will certainly be filled with shoving politics down our throats arguments. When playing 3 Remake, we didn't get that feeling, which is bittersweet because on one hand, we feel kind of gaslit by conversations around the internet insisting that doing stuff like having queer characters in a story for no reason is political and makes things worse. So I tend to like it when media we consume doesn't validate us too much, just a little, as a treat. But on the other hand, when something doesn't seem to have restraint with its messaging and themes, well, we love and respect the shit out of it. We've also come to realize that Resident Evil in particular has a sort of track record that some of this messaging isn't new, and so it doesn't rock the boat like it would in a new IP. So what about class consciousness? Don't piddle your undies, we're getting there. Resident Evil's main villain Umbrella, its founders and business partners, are way worse than any monsters or viruses they create. In the process of building their labs and doing unethical experimentation, they've devoured countless lives from both people they kidnap and from employees that they no longer deem valuable. Umbrella even has a secret prison for people they need to keep quiet. Very cost effective. And they don't have to answer any stinking government regulations. It's a win-win. Now, if I were a YouTuber with more executive function, I might have looked up and displayed something a director or writer of a Resident Evil game may have said in the past about anti-corporatism. But I'm not, and I didn't, and I don't think it's fully necessary here, but I want to acknowledge it at least. Plus, working for a huge company, I don't think anyone on any of the teams will have outright said anything radical. But, to many folks, a plot like Resident Evil, or many Resident Evil games, aren't political at all. After all, evil corporations are very common in sci-fi. From Dead Space to RoboCop, it's not hard to find. We're so used to them. But when I think about it, the main games, including Code Veronica, before Resident Evil 4, all kind of have this unifying thing about them showing how companies are fudging evil. And it's easy to say, not all companies, and of course Resident Evil isn't really anti-capitalist, but it's hard to deny that the influence that Umbrella has is what many companies have in real life, even if they don't dole out human rights offenses as often. The fallacy that you just need a good company in charge, see Blue Umbrella, is the same as saying, we just need a good ruling monarch. It shouldn't be up to chance that someone or someones with great power in society should use it well. Society should, in my opinion, have some fail-safes against abuses of power. In capitalism, morality is disincentivized because it doesn't really help profit. And for that reason, the most profitable companies will have to be the most willing to put profits over everything else. That's why Umbrella is so powerful, and that's why it took them 5 games to dissolve? And that's not even covering the spin-offs. Oh, and if you're wondering, we're counting 0, 1, 2, 3, and Code Veronica. The fall of Umbrella, as stated by Resident Evil 4, comes at the very beginning and after a 6-year time skip at that. And even then, the founders and higher-ups still got up to some experimental shenanigans. Okay, now class consciousness, we swear. During a very contentious part of Resident Evil 3 Remake, you fight through a power station infested by huge bugs called the Drain Demos, and they kinda suck, and that they make you use your hard-earned green herbs if they grab you, because they force-feed you their babies, which after a little bit of time will totally kill you. Unless, of course, you use a green herb immediately. These enemies only exist in this one part of the game, which is a shame not only because their counterpart in the original RE3 were spread across more parts of the game, but also because the mechanic of them making you use green herbs was interesting and challenging, and put a fear in me that Nemesis never did. In the context of the story, you read a few notes and even find bodies of electrical workers who fell victim to the demos. They had a bad time. One note shows how the bugs were there for a while and then no one in power cared. They just had to keep on working. Their boss seemed unsympathetic. The bugs were attacking workers and they just had to deal with it. I'm led to believe one survived, but the final note you find is written by the person who he may have been looking for, because you find another note next to a body. And when reading it, it struck us for 2 reasons. It reminded us of the infamous Itchy Scratchy letter from Resident Evil 1, a note written right before one succumbs to a horrible fate. And because all the electrical workers were made to continue working despite the horrible conditions, it really reminded us of the pressure essential workers are under right now. In the process of writing this, we replayed the first half of the game and were reminded of an additional note left behind by a sewer worker detailing the disappearance of a co-worker, how the police refused to look for him, and how the author himself was stalked by the hunter-gamers in the sewers. The note is found next to a body, presumably his, which leads me to believe that he was killed by a person. An Umbrella researcher was testing the hunter-gammas in the sewers. The gammas swallow folks whole, which is very convenient for both the researcher and the police, who just have to say, "Oh, that person's probably just skipped town." The police may not have been intentionally complicit in the cover-up, but ultimately that doesn't really matter. The guy is dead and his family will never know why. Reading these notes was validating in a pretty horrible way. Art imitates life after all. These people were only a small sample of all the folks who have had to put their lives in danger, often with little to no protection, because the system they're in, that so many of us are in, is a meat grinder that only values those it can exploit, and which uses and abuses those people till they're no longer useful for that purpose, ultimately leaving the unproductive and the used up to die. While Jill was stuck inside and Raccoon City burned, so many people were suffering and dying, and notes like the ones in the power station and in the sewers illustrate this in horrid detail. Umbrella was for sure responsible, but capitalism had given them the means and the government didn't care. Umbrella paid the city's paycheck after all. Real life isn't much different. It's just that it's happening on a much bigger scale. The fact that the police chief answers directly to Umbrella reinforces that. Any police that were dead set on helping the city were doomed from the start. Police Chief Irons sabotaged the city's police. The ones held up in the police station in particular were set up to die. And in 3 Remake, a note in Jill's apartment at the start shows how Chief Irons was dragging his feet with the Umbrella investigation after the mansion incident. Chief Irons also disbanded the STARS team after the incident, for good measure at stopping them from blowing the whistle. We're very much in the camp of ACAB, and this is kind of a great example as to why. Even if you have good intentions, going against the police apparatus is impossible. You can't change it from the inside. The games kind of put it all on Irons, but in a lot of situations, it wouldn't just be that he's in Umbrella's pocket. The police aren't defending public safety. They would be dispatched to stop rioting. You know, defending Capitol. Just like the rioting in the beginning of the game. I think it speaks volumes that there isn't a police last stand like in the OG RE3. We're not saying it definitely doesn't happen, but it makes the remake feel thematically different. The police in general don't get any sort of glory moment, and I think that's intentional. And now that we think about it, all the gates in the city as you first make your way through, keeping zombies at bay, makes us feel kind of uneasy. Almost like the cops just put up fences in areas that were determined to be lost. After all, Jill's desperate escape is also a watershed moment for the city, and everything happens to be coming down, like a band-aid falling off of a large stab wound. Also, we have to point out that a huge company sent an assassin to kill multiple people who threatened their continued financial prosperity, of whom happened to only know enough to incriminate them because they survived an experiment that they were tricked into participating in the first place. Umbrella is like a kick-the-dog machine. They even kidnapped and groomed kids to grow up to be future researchers. We'll talk about that in another video.
I should have seen it coming. It didn't take long after the fall of the Umbrella Corporation for their bioweapons to end up in the hands of terrorists. A new era of bioterrorism descended upon vulnerable countries, shifting the balance of power throughout the region. People in the destabilized areas soon feared another incident like Raccoon City.
As the scope of Resident Evil's games expanded to an international stage with military organizations and sovereign nations, it devolves more into a sci-fi military thriller than an outright horror game. Partially because the threat is well known and is handled by those who are used to bioweapons. But the Raccoon City-centered games have a different tone. There's desperation present that many games in the series don't have moving forward. Throughout all the games, however, is a strong sense of anti-corporatism. Resident Evil villains commonly lack empathy and are usually driven by money, power, or accolades. This makes the horror more sterilized. The monsters aren't evil. They're often victims themselves. They're a product, and a very lucrative one at that. And anyone lost in the pursuit of creating that product or to protect assets are worth it. Nikolai and Jill are ideologically opposed. Nikolai has really internalized the lessons of capitalism. The only thing he cares about more than money is self-preservation. Money can even be seen as a tool for that preservation. He seems almost bitter that Jill wants to help people, despite the horrors around them.
Why is she here?
She's hoping to get the trains running again.
Bad time to start getting dead weight for it. She's unreliable. Can't pull the trigger when it counts. He was infected.
He might have been infected.
Oh, stars be soft. No wonder so many of you dead.
And what are you, UBCS, killing your own people?
He would have turned. There's your sense of self-preservation. Go back to the subway station. Don't need a bleeding heart like you getting in the way.
Nikolai trusts no one and hates Jill for not being that way too. In fact, he seems surprised she even made it this far without being like him. Jill, on the other hand, despite the tragedy she's faced and losing most of her friends to violence, goes out of her way to help pretty much everyone she encounters. And although she doesn't trust the UBCS members at first, outside of Nikolai, she seems to warm up to all of them. Even if it puts her in danger, Jill seems to want to help people. The extent of Jill's altruism even surprised us. While playing for the first time, we got mad at her for putting herself in danger to buy the UBCS and the people they're trying to save more time. This is because we were afraid of facing Nemesis again so soon. Jill later steps it up even further by risking her own life trying to acquire the virus vaccine to save Raccoon City from its horrible fate. And she's visibly distraught when Nikolai seals that fate. Moreover, her trust of Carlos growing throughout the game is what spurred her to go to Nest 2 to help him out in the first place. And after her second nightmare sequence, and being afraid of having to kill him if he gets infected, it's obvious that Jill values Carlos at least as much as any of the STARS members she's lost. Throughout the game, Nikolai berates Jill about her worldview, saying that she's a bleeding heart and doesn't have what it takes to pull the trigger when it counts. Which was kind of confusing at first, considering Jill is definitely a fighter. But she only kills monsters, and Nikolai has no remorse about any humans he puts down, and he's she's willing to put them down for survival or for profit. At the end of the game, Jill's holding Chekhov's gun. All of her interactions with Nikolai have led up to this point. It's finally time for her to pull the trigger, and she does. But not like Nikolai believes she should. In fact, the first time through the game, we were thinking more like Nikolai during the standoff. When we tried to shoot him the first time, we went for a fatal headshot, and in the most delicious irony, Nikolai kills Jill and Carlos instead. So on the next attempt, we don't try to kill him, and in doing so, not only beat the game, but have shown that Nikolai was wrong. It's not better to only be out for oneself. Jill isn't soft for wanting to help people or valuing human life. This was a defining moment for us, because Nikolai didn't seem to budge on his anger towards Jill, even as she proved her survival skills time and time again. It was clear early on that his anger towards Jill was intrinsic to who she was. After the standoff, with little power left to speak of, Nikolai tries to take advantage of Jill's altruism and attempts to bargain for his life. I don't think Jill leaving Nikolai to die is validating his worldview though. It was a huge risk she couldn't afford to take. If he saw a chance to turn the tables on her, he surely wouldn't hesitate. Jill says after escaping the city,
"All this death wasn't caused by a monster-making virus. It was greed. Human greed. I decided then and there, the ashes of Raccoon City would be Umbrella's ashes too."
and she's right. But that greed was encouraged by a system that rewards it. And even if she only blames Umbrella, her devotion to taking down the evil corporation after Raccoon City is a testament to the real work that must be done to remove the heel of capitalism from the neck of all those it dominates. And her slow trust of Carlos shows she's moving closer to class consciousness and that she recognizes not everyone who works for Umbrella holds its values. Some can even be allies. In fact, many members of the UBCS seem to have not had much of a choice in joining. In this system, we're all at risk of being destitute without money, which drives a lot of our decisions, and Umbrella has a lot to spare. Jill's struggle isn't over, and neither is ours. Thanks for watching.